All right, so today we're going to be reviewing loops. So loops just allow you to repeat code over and over again in your program based upon either a certain condition, or if you know how many times you want to do it, then you do a for loop, right? If you're doing a condition, you're going to do a while loop. So for these reviews, I'm going to use these W3 Schools tutorials because they're pretty good and they're pretty straightforward. And they kind of explain what exactly I'm saying, and they give you another resource to use. All right. So again, while loops or any type of loop, it lets you repeat code, or whether it be, I don't know, you're trying to print something out, you're trying to count something, you're trying to ask the user a certain piece of code or a certain command over and over again, whatever it may be. That's what loops allow you to do is repeat code. So there are two types of loops. You have while loops and you have for loops. While loops, again, are based on a certain condition, that condition being true. So while that condition is true, do this. Once that condition is false, break the loop or stop the loop and then move on. All right. So if you look here on the screen, we have while condition, code block to be executed. So that's the basic syntax of a while loop. So if we do this example right here, we're creating an integer, int I equals 0. While I is less than 5, print out the value of I, and then increment I. Remember, I plus plus is to increment. If we had minus minus, that would be decrement. So we try this ourselves. You see it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if we visualize this, we can take that same code, put it inside this visualizer, and we can see what exactly it's doing in memory. All right. So the first thing is to create that integer, I, and set it equal to 0, right? The next thing is to start the while loop and print out I. So it prints it out down here. Then we do I plus plus, and you see it increments I by 1. Go back up to the top of the while loop. It's going to check to make sure I is less than 5. It is. It's equal to 1. Print out I, then I plus plus. And we just keep repeating this process. All right. All right, so once we do this, I is equal to 4. That's still less than 5. We keep going. Now I equals 5. That's not less than 5 any longer, right? So hold on a second. Hold on just a second. Oh, it sounded like somebody was coming in my door. All right. So now I equals 5. That's no longer less than 5. We end. We finish that code. All right. That makes sense? All right, I'm going to assume so. All right. So we go back. So just like you have a while loop, you also have something called a do while. I don't really use do whiles that much, but it's available to you. The difference between a do while and a regular while loop is that with a do while, you're going to do this at least one time, and then it checks the condition. Right? So it goes through, it runs the code, then it checks. It goes through, runs the code, then it checks. So this is executed at least one time. While loops, depending on if the condition is true or false, it could never execute. It just depends. Do whiles will execute at least one time. So here's another do while, or here's another loop. We can visualize this. All right. Hold on. I think, yeah, I have too many brackets. All right. So I have the I equal to 0. And you see it's going to do this first and then check the condition. Do this first, check the condition. And then it ends. See, the same output, it's just, it's going to run this first and then do the condition. Again, do whiles execute at least once. So if you're on this website, I want you to click right here, start the exercise. And I want y'all to try exercise 1 and exercise 2. All right, and let me know if you have questions. I'll give you about 5 minutes to do those. So we'll turn back around at 10:12. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. How did you get to the exercise?
So I went here. I just went down here to start the exercise. And it opens a new tab. Then on the left
Oh,
over
okay,
here,
I
you have
see it. I
exercise
see
1
it.
and exercise 2.
I see it. Thank you.
We're going to do all 6 exercises in this class. It's just when we get to the different parts, we'll jump on those other exercises. And again, if you sent me your resume or I spoke to you about your resume and internships, please have those back to me as soon as possible. I'm going to send those off today. Is everybody good or need more time? Just give me a thumbs up if you're good.
Just the first exercise or everything else?
1 and 2.
Okay.
1 and 2. right, I'm gonna go ahead and continue unless y'all need more time. So for the first exercise, print I as long as I is less than 6. So what basically you have to fill in 2 pieces of code here. So the first one would be a while loop. While I is less than 6, system.out.println I. And so if I did just this, this would print and run infinitely, right? Because I would never change. It would always be equal to 1. So what we have to do is put in I++. And that's correct. Did everybody get that? Head nods. All right. All right, so exercise 2, it's a do while, essentially the same thing. So use the do while loop. All you have to type in is do and while. And that's your basic do while. Everybody get that as well? Again, in this class, we'll mainly focus on while loops, so you can kind of ignore do whiles unless you just really want to use them, you like it better. But I mostly use while loops, even in my coding and all that stuff. All right, so any questions on on while loops? We're going to move on to for loops now. All right. All right. So for loops, as opposed to while loops, you know exactly how many times you want to go through this statement, right? For example, if you want to print out I 5 times, you know it's always going to be 5, you print out 5 times. Or let's say you read in a variable from the console and ask the user how many times they want to print something. Well, even if you don't necessarily know that before you run the program, that variable will always hold a number. And that number will be how many times you want to run through the loop. So you always know that number. As opposed to a while loop, your while loop could be a Boolean variable. So while there is input, do this. If there's no input, go on. For loops, while I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, do this. So here's an example. So for in I equals 0, I is less than 5, I++, system.out.println I. This essentially does the same thing as that while loop we just did, right? The exact same thing, except instead of having to do I++, all that I equals 0, you do it all in one line. And this is the syntax. So let's visualize this. So this whole one line does all that stuff as before. It creates a variable I, it checks to make sure I is less than 5, and then once we run through this, it'll increment I. So your system.print I, it does all that checks and it increments. It checks, increments. So it kind of simplifies the while loop when you know explicitly how many times you want to do this. All right. Well, let's say, let's change it up. Let's say we want to read in from the console how many times to print out I. So let's import java.util.scanner. Let's create a scanner object. Prompt the user. How many times do you want to loop? Int max equals input.nextInt. All right. And so now we set I equal to 0, I is less than max. So now if I put in a 15, it's going to run through 15 times. We do system.out, and let me zoom out a little bit. How many times do you want to loop? It reads in this 15 over here. You see max equals 15. And so now the for loop will just keep going while I is less than 15. And it's going to print it out each time. So although we don't know what max is before we run this program, once we run it, we'll know what max is. All right. Here's just another example. While I is less than or equal to 10. So before, we were just doing while I is less than a number, but we can also do less than or equal to. And basically, it'll keep going until that number equals it. So let's visualize this. So you see I, same process, we create I, we increment. And now I equals 10. Typically it would break, but we're saying equal, less than or equal to. So it continues again, but now it's going to break because now I is greater than 10. And you see, even in this example, we don't necessarily have to increment I only by 1. In this one, we incremented I by 2 each time. You can increment I by 3. You can increment I by 4. Each time you go through this loop, it'll increment it by however many you say. So we repeat this. You see I starts off as 0. We print it out. We go through again. Now I equals 2. We print it out. Go through again. I equals 4. We print that out. So on and so forth. I equals 10. That still works under this condition. So we print it out. Now I equals 12. That no longer works under this condition, so we break. All right. So one last, well, we'll get to this when we talk about arrays. But basically with for loops, if you have an array, you can create a for loop that automatically iterates through your array. So each time you go through, variable name will equal each index in the array. But we'll talk about that more when we get to arrays. So for you all, got some exercises. So exercise 3 and exercise 4. Exercise 4 will show you what I'm talking about with the array. And we'll visualize this. So try exercise 3 and exercise 4. We'll circle back. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. These aren't too difficult. You just have to type some things. So we'll circle back around 10:22. If you have any questions, let me know. Everybody good? All right. So basically what we need to do is print yes 5 times. So how do we do this? Well, we can create a for loop. And essentially in this example, all we have to do is type for I++, and then yes. And there you go. So let me go back. We would do for, we have to increment I++, and then in our system not out, we would say yes. All right. So we visualize this. We have for in I++. We print out yes. Come on, Java Visualizer. Oh, and if ever you thought there was a good project to work on, this one would be a good project. This Java Visualizer, it's open source. So you could download the source code and fix this because it's not the best thing in the world. All right, something went wrong. Let's try this again. All right, so first thing is we create our variable in I equals 0. Then we check to make sure I is less than 5. We go forward. We print yes. Go back up here, increment I by 1, then check I. And keep going until I equals 5. So now I equals 5. We check this condition. This condition is now false because I is no longer less than 5, and we break. All right. Cool. Everybody good? All right. Let's go to exercise 4. This is what I was talking about with arrays. So this is an array right here. And so when you do a for loop like this, for string I equals or colon cars, it basically loops through this array. I would be equal to each value in our array each time we go through. All right, so that's correct. Let's go back and let's visualize this. All right. Make it look a little bit better. Okay, so we have an array of string contains Volvo, BMW, and Ford. Then we iterate through that array each time I equal one of these values. And it's going to just keep on going down the line and then print out I. So we visualize this. You see we create an array. And again, an array is just a list. So the first index in our array is Volvo. The second index is BMW. The third index is Ford. And if you remember in arrays, we always start from 0 and move on down the line. All right. Now we have our for loop, string I, and each index in cars. So the first time we go through this for loop, I is going to equal Volvo. That's the first index. Print out Volvo. The second time, now I equals BMW. Print out BMW. The third time, I equals Ford. Print out Ford. And then there's no more in the array, so we're done. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question about that? All right. So what if I have a loop and I go through the loop But at a certain point, I want the loop to break. So for example, if I have a while loop, well, I'll do this over and over and over again. However, if a new condition occurs, break the loop completely. Stop doing the loop. So for example, if I write a server, right? Servers are what we use to deliver web pages, whatever it may be. So you don't want servers to ever be down, right? You want them to run constantly 99.9999999% of the time. So inside a server program, there's a while loop. And basically it just says while true, nothing else. So in those server programs, they'll just have this type of code. While true. Do this stuff right here, right? Listen in for new connections. When there's a new connection, send back a web page. Just does that over and over again. You don't ever want that to go down. However, if, I don't know, if shutdown condition break, right? So if there's a shutdown condition that occurs, we break that while loop and then we finish, all right? That's a graceful shutdown. This is not if, you know, the power button is hit and it all comes down. If this is a graceful shutdown, say for example, we're upgrading our server, all right, gracefully shut down. We'll have an if statement. We'll do a graceful shutdown, which just means that we shut it down with all the proper configurations and we save all of our work or whatever it may be. And then we break out of this while loop. So we're finished. So that's what a break statement is for, okay? Break statements are really good. There's also something called a continue statement that helps you just skip over this one. So for example, let's say we want to print out, we have that array, right? We have this array, but we don't want to print out BMW. For some whatever reason, we don't like BMW, so we don't want to print that out. So we can do a continue statement if I dot equals BMW continue. And what that means is just skip over this one and go to the next one. So we visualize this. Where are we at? We visualize this. It's going to skip over BMW. Again, we create our array. I equals Volvo. It checks to make sure I doesn't equal BMW. Prints out Volvo down here. We do this again. Now I equals BMW. So if I equals BMW, it's going to go in here and it's going to skip. It's going to go to the next one. Now I equals Ford. We print out Ford, and then we're done. So if I change this to a break statement, instead of skipping to the next one, it's going to break the entire loop. So we run through I equals Volvo, we print it out. We run through again. Now I equals BMW, we break, and we're done. All right. So it's really helpful if you want to stop the loop completely, or you want to continue on to the next one. You want to skip. So now you all do exercise 5 and exercise 6, and then we'll go on from there. You all good? We're still working. We're going to assume silence means you're still working, so.
I'm good.
All right. All right, so exercise 5, stop the loop if I equals 5. So whenever you see stop the loop, that means you want to break. So break. All right, that means stop the loop. Correct. Exercise 6, in the loop, when the value is 4, jump directly to the next value. So whenever you want to skip something, you do continue. And there you go. All right. Is there anything that we covered today that doesn't make sense? Everybody understand what I've done today? All right, so I'm going to bring up one of your old friends. Last semester, exam 2, right? The ATM banking program. At this point, we have reviewed everything that you should know in order to do this part, except for the extra credit part, because that deals with arrays. But this part, we should be able to do at this point. All right? You should be able to write this program and go from there. So let's do this. Let's do this in the last about 15 minutes of class. So write an ATM banking program. The program should prompt the user for their PIN. Let me zoom in a little bit. For this program, assume the user's PIN is 1234. If the user enters the correct PIN, the program should continue. If the user enters the wrong PIN, the program should prompt the user again for their PIN until it is correct. Your program should give the user the option to 0, view their account balance, 1, make a withdrawal, or 2, make a deposit. If the user enters a 0, you should display the amount of money they have in their account. If the user enters a 1 or 2, your program should ask how much. For this program, assume the user starts with a balance of $100. Your program should allow the user to keep making transactions until they enter a 3 to exit. All right, so it's very similar to an ATM. When you go up to an ATM, you insert your card, and it asks for your PIN number. You type in your PIN number. If it's incorrect, it's going to say wrong PIN. Let you type it in again. You type in the correct PIN. You have 3 options: to view account, withdraw, or deposit money, or to exit out entirely. So let's write this program. And basically, again, you're writing an ATM program. The only difference is our program doesn't have a GUI. But in this class, we'll learn how to make a GUI. Our program is strictly from the command line. But towards the end of this class, we'll learn how to make GUIs. So the first thing we need is to set their PIN number. So int default PIN equals 1234, right? And their default bank account or account balance. So double balance equals, we said it starts at $100. So now we have all of our basic things. We can do PIN. Lowercase it. Equals 1234, and double balance equals 100. So since we're reading from the console, we do need a scanner. Import java.util.scanner. Then we need to create a scanner object. So scanner input equals new scanner system.in. All right. So let's do enter PIN equals 0. They haven't entered anything in yet. So since we want to keep asking the user to enter in their PIN until they enter it correctly, let's use a while loop, right? So while entered PIN doesn't equal PIN. So we know initially entered pin doesn't equal pin, right? Entered pin right now is 0, and our pin number is 1, 2, 3, 4. That doesn't equal itself, so we're going to go into this while loop. This would also be a good place for a do while, right? Because you want to run it at least once. System.out, we're going to prompt our user, .print, please enter your pin. And then we do entered pin equals input.nextInt. So we read that in from the console. If entered pin doesn't equal pin, now we just want to hit them with a prompt that says incorrect. System.out.println incorrect pin. And then the loop is going to repeat itself. However, if they enter in the correct pin, it's not going to go into this. It's just going to end the while loop. It's not going to go in here. It's just going to go on to the next step. So let's just see this part. So let's enter in 2514, that number, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So we create our scanner object. So we create our input object, which is a scanner. We set pin equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, and their initial balance to $100. The entered pin currently equals 0. That's just by default. So while entered pin doesn't equal pin. So entered pin does not equal pin. So we're going to go into this while loop. We're going to say system.out.print, please enter your pin. And then entered pin equals input.nextInt, which is this right here. So you see entered pin equals 2514. We check to make sure entered pin doesn't equal pin. So entered pin does not equal our current pin number. So we print out incorrect pin. And we keep repeating this process. Please enter your pin. We read in 5648. We know that doesn't equal the pin. So we print out incorrect pin. Do this again. Please enter your pin. Now pin equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So it skips over this if statement, goes back up here, and then it's done. All right, because entered pin equals our pin. So this condition is now false. This condition is false. It's going to continue. And then we're done. All right. That makes sense? If it doesn't make sense, let me know. Everything we do in this class is going to be based on these while loops and if statements. All right. Again, if you don't feel comfortable asking your questions in class, you can type them to me in the chat as a direct message, or you can email me and we can meet outside of class. All right. So now we have this. Once we continue past this while loop, the user has entered in the correct pin. So now we want to prompt them to do all the account things and all that different stuff. So we could do another while loop, while option doesn't equal 3. Option basically will be what the user types in. So int option equals -1. Right now they haven't typed anything in. All right. So all we can do, we actually can do this while true. And I'll show you why I'm doing this. While true, same thing up here, while true, else, break. So if pin doesn't equal, if entered pin doesn't equal pin, we're going to type out incorrect pin. However, if entered pin equals pin, we're going to break this while loop, right? I just made a simple change. That way we don't have redundant checks. All right, so we have to prompt the user for their options, or at least their dialog. System.out.println. I forget what it wants us to say. Please enter the transaction number you would like to make. And so now we type out all of our transaction numbers. And if we don't finish this by the end of class, we'll just pick this back up on Friday. So there's one transaction number. The next one. Next one. And finally, the last one, which is 3 to exit. So basically, we give the user all these different options. And then we'd say option equals input.nextEnd. So then we read in what the user wants to do. All right. So if the user types in a 0, option will equal 0, 1, 2, 3. They type in anything else, we want to respond to that as well. All right. So we can do a switch statement on this option. So our first case is 0, and we'll do our view account here. So system.out.println, your current balance is, and then we do plus balance, right? Plus that variable. Great. I don't know if we necessarily need the break, but we'll see. Case 1. Let's do this. Withdraw, so system.out.println, how much would you like to withdraw? And then we do double withdrawal equals input.nextDouble. We read in that from the console. And then balance equals minus equal withdrawal. And right now, we don't have overdraft protection, so we'll assume that they can draft more than what's in their account. And then I just want to copy this again. Tell them what their current balance is. Our second case, case 2, is a deposit. Deposit is very similar to our withdrawal, except obviously we're depositing into our account. Deposit. Instead of minus equal, we're going to do plus equal deposit. There we go. And then case 3 is just to break out of the while loop, which doesn't want me to do it. So actually we can do it up here. If option equals 3, break. So instead of that, we'll have a default down here. Basically, the default means that if these cases are not true, whatever else the user typed in, we're going to say invalid input. System.out.println, invalid input. All right. And there you go. That's our full program. All right, so let's test this out. So first part is the PIN number. Let's just assume they type it in correctly. Then they want to view their account. They want to deposit into our account, $500. Then they want to withdraw $250. Sorry, withdraw $250. I know this is really weird that we can't do it while we're running it, but they type in a 5, which is invalid input, and they type in a 3, which is to exit. So let's test this. Hopefully I didn't make any mistakes. And I did. All right. If option equals 3, break. All right, so of course the first thing to do is create our scanner. We create our scanner over here called input. We have our default PIN, 1234, and our default balance, which is $100. Right now, the entered PIN equals 0. So while true, print out, please enter your PIN. We read in 1234 from the console. That's the correct PIN, so we skip over that. Now we read in your option. We tell you all of the different options, and we read in the first one, which is a 0. 0 is to view the account balance. So we jump over this if statement, go down to our switch, print out your current balance, and break. Go back up to the top. Read in the next option, which is 2. We check this if statement. We jump down to 2. How much would you like to deposit? We read in 500. So our deposit equals 500. Now our balance, we added 500 to that 100, so our balance now equals 600. And we print that out down here. We do this again. The user typed in a 2, again, which is to deposit, I believe. So they deposit 250. We add that to our balance. Now our balance is 850. We break. Do this again. We read in a 5, which of course is an invalid input. So it jumps down to our default. Invalid input. We do this again. We read in a 3. 3 means to exit. So this if statement is not going to be true. We break out of our while loop and we're done. All right. I know that's the end of class. So we'll pick this back up next time, and I'll just go through it a couple more times so you can see what I'm talking about. Again, if you need help, let me know, email me, and we can set up some time to discuss this. And because again, this is review. So going forward next week, we'll actually start some new content, new material. So you need to have this review on lock before we start that new stuff. All right. Well, with that, that'll end class, and I will see you on Friday.
All right, have a good day.
You too. Friday will be virtual. All right, so we made the banking app, so ATM. So public class ATM, public static void, main, string args, all the good stuff of a pretty standard Java program.
It's all good. It's all good.
So, Bruce. Thank you. Panashe, I'm still waiting on you with your camera. All right, so again, if I run through this, the first thing we want to do is ask the user for their PIN number. So I have a while loop here that just keeps running through. So while true, it just keeps going indefinitely. I system.out.println, and I ask for their PIN. I read their PIN in. If the entered PIN doesn't equal their standard PIN, which is 1234, we print out incorrect PIN, and then this loop repeats itself. However, if the entered PIN equals the PIN, so this else statement, I want to break this while loop and continue with my program. All right, so the next while loop, again, it runs indefinitely until a break statement is hit, which is right here. So in this while loop, I want to ask the user, what transaction they want to do. Either enter a 0 to view the account balance, a 1 to withdraw, a 2 to deposit, or a 3 to exit. All right. Once I prompt the user with what to enter. I read in what they enter right here. A 3 means to exit the program. So if that option equals a 3, that means the user wants to break it. So we break this while loop and end the program. If it's not a 3, we go down to the switch statement, and I have all these different cases that correspond to these different options up here. So a 0 is just to view the account balance. A 1 is to make a withdrawal. And a 2 is to make a deposit. Then lastly, anything else that we read in is invalid input. All right. So whatever else we read in will be considered invalid input, and we'll just ignore it. We'll say invalid input and repeat this loop. Any questions about this program, what I did, why I did it? Don't be shy.